Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. The American seizure of an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela is the latest episode in a whole series of US moves against the regime of Nicolas Maduro. Is Washington gearing up for a war? Well, to talk about it, we're joined by Mark Toth, expert in national security and foreign relations and co-founder of Intrep 360. Good afternoon, Mark.
Maciej, great to see you. Thank you. Greetings to your viewers.
Great to see you too. So far, it's we're talking about just a tanker, but will American soldiers in fact enter Venezuela as many fear?
Yeah, Maciej, that's the question that remains to be answered. Late in November, Trump was threatening that kinetic actions against Venezuela would be happening soon. For some people, they thought that might mean bombing military bases, airports, port facilities, where Trump alleging that drug activities, smuggling activities are happening that ultimately make their way through to the United States. That hasn't happened. So far, it's been a campaign of rhetoric. Now, that rhetoric, though, is being backed by some increasing action. Obviously, since early September, the U.S. has been attacking these, what they claim to be narco-terrorist boats in the high seas in and around the Caribbean, but also in some areas of the Pacific. Many argue, I suspect that it is, that those actions might be illegal, but the seizure of a new, of the Iranian tanker, which was flying under a Guyana flag, is just one more pressure tactic that Trump is now introducing, just like the attacks on the narco terrorists. Whether we're immediately close or imminently close to a U.S. strike on Venezuela itself, I'm just not sure yet. But what is certain here is Trump is ratcheting up the pressure. These are intended to send Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro a message, and I suspect he's getting it. But I don't think he's going to react to it in the way that Trump hopes.
Now, you mentioned the campaign against narco traffickers, the alleged narco traffickers. So the Americans regard the latest military operations against Venezuelans as unlawful or rather justified. I mean, there were attacks on alleged drug trafficking boats, and there were some killings of the crews, and now there's the seizure of an oil tanker in, well, international waters. Now, these do not sound like very lawful actions.
Yeah, and it gets tricky because you have to look at it first from an international law standpoint, specifically the UN Convention on the Laws of the High Seas, which do allow countries like the U.S. the right to visit, quote unquote, ships to inspect them to make sure that they're not carrying illegal cargo or other violations of international law or U.S. law. But the right to kill them is different, and that requires an imminent threat stemming from these. I think the Trump administration, as many here in the U.S. also concur with, is stretching that definition because there's no imminent threat or harm to U.S. troops in the area that are operating around these boats. They could be interdicted with military force. That would be a better way. Trump, though, is arguing that the imminent threat is in terms of the deaths and the injuries that these drugs eventually are causing to Americans once they get them. But the problem there is it's not imminent, and that would be a violation of the UN Charter, specifically because you have a right to self-defense, but the threat has to be imminent. In terms of U.S. law regarding the tanker, Trump is on more stable ground there. Look, the U.S. has found in the past that this same Iranian tanker that's just flying under a Guyana flag has transported oil to Cuba, to Iran, to cut forces operating in Lebanon in connection with Hezbollah. It has been involved in what in the U.S. is considered illegal activities. So his right to seize that ship is probably on more stable ground. In terms of U.S. law, some may be skeptical, though, whether it was warranted under international law.
Right, Mark. Now, every time U.S. threatens a smaller country with an invasion, usually the smaller country responds, it will be your Vietnam, it will be your next Vietnam. Now, but in Vietnam, there was a broad support of the communist regime up in the north. Now, what about the public support of Nicolas Maduro?
Yeah, no, I know that's what the Brazilian president is saying, that this could turn into a Vietnam, as you mentioned. I doubt that that happens. I think the calculus in Washington, and I'm not saying that I agree with it, I'm just letting you know what the Team Trump is thinking here, is that because Maduro is so unpopular and because he's an illegitimately elected president, and the people in terms of the last election proved that they want to change, and Machado, who effectively has put her hat in the ring to say, I want to be the president, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who made her way to Oslo to get that award by sneaking out of Venezuela. I think the Trump administration thinks they can topple Maduro, and it's just a question of how much pressure it's going to take. Are these messaging enough? So far, it hasn't been. Will it require more overt kinetic actions on Venezuelan territory? Perhaps. But, unintended consequences sometimes, Machi, in war. When you start attacking a country, they suddenly start getting more patriotic and nationalistic in their response, and they may view that as just a step too far from the U.S. Time will tell which way that swings.
Right. Now, you mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize for María Corina Machado. How is it adding to the whole situation?
Look, I think it gives her credibility. It's the international community coming together, albeit through a committee in Oslo, to award this prize. It certainly gives Venezuelans a different figure to look toward as the potential leader should Maduro fall. So I think the role that she's playing, I think the fact that she did win that Peace Prize, deserving of it, in my opinion, can play a valuable role here in terms of persuading Venezuelans that there's a better way forward, and certainly a better way than having the U.S. militarily attack the country to oust Maduro. But I don't think, so far, sadly, that this is going to happen at an organic grassroots level in Venezuela. We've just seen too many times where the people rise up and yearn for freedom and for the Maduro regime to be overtaken, but they just can't beat the forces that are available to Maduro that are arrayed against them to overcome that. So it's going to take some kind of external pressure. The messaging probably won't work. It may take kinetic. But again, like I warned, there could be intentional consequences to that. It just remains to be determined.
Now, in the aftermath of this potential kinetic conflict, as you put it, could Corina Machado be the next Venezuelan leader the U.S. could really count on?
I think so. I think it just depends on the nature of how Maduro gets toppled, what kind of power vacuums might come to play in Venezuela, people competing, even, members of his own regime that would look to replace him, but just continue more of the same. I think the U.S. is going to have to exert extreme pressure to make sure that happens, and that would help with the regional allies in the area would do it. But the problem here, Machi, is that this is not just at this point concentrated on Venezuela in a way that's not helpful to this in terms of rallying those regional allies in South America. You have Trump saying to the Colombian president, look, Gustavo Petro, you're next because I view your country as basically a drug dealer. And so it's just a difficult question. She should. I think she's the logical next leader should Maduro fall. But there's a lot of different angles at play here that may trip that up and may prevent her becoming from the leader. I hope that she does.
So you've already touched upon the topic. My next question, well, what would a U.S. intervention mean for the stability of the whole region? Because, as you mentioned, it's not only about Venezuela. The sort of a domino effect may take place in South America. Then again, there's Cuba. So the stability of the region.
Yeah, Mashi, I think if it were just isolated to Venezuela, problematic as it has been, the stability of the region probably could be better, faster. I think the problem, though, is there's bigger forces at play here. There's some great powers competition that's occurring between the United States, Russia, and China. This isn't just messaging to Venezuela. It's a hands-off messaging to Beijing and to Moscow that, look, you're not going to be playing in our background in the Western Hemisphere, and certainly certainly Trump's new, in my opinion, ill-advised national security strategy that turns his back on Europe and on the Mideast in some ways. I think the strategy is saying, look, the Western Hemisphere is ours. Trump has declared a corollary, in addition to the Monroe Doctrine, this kind of governed U.S. approaches toward South America in the past, to say that he's going to be aggressive about it. And I think in the short term, if he does extend this, it becomes a set of dominoes that require U.S. kinetic action, and Colombia is next. Then I think this region potentially can get more unstable. Look, I don't have a problem with making sure that China doesn't build bases in and around the Panama Canal or at the end of the world in Argentina. That's smart geopolitical defense of the U.S. and the Western Hemisphere. But I don't think toppling countries is the way to get there. I think inducing these countries to work as allies is a far better approach.
You said that far bigger powers are at play here. Is Russia preventing the American intervention in Venezuela?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the problem when it comes to Russia is, look, all the way back to Putin and Hugo Chavez, soon after Hugo Chavez took power in the early 2000s, Putin started arming Venezuela, something I've called out as hypocrisy, because for all his complaints about the West arming Ukraine, here he is in the Western Hemisphere since like 2002, 2003, off the top of my head, arming Venezuela, training the military, selling them fighter jets, helicopters, etc. And certainly there's been ongoing training of Maduro's forces after Chavez. That relationship has continued. I don't think that's stopping. I think there's too much activity happening right now in the U.S. that they're not going to let Russia get in the way of this. I mean, you do have the largest U.S. buildup of naval power in the Caribbean since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Russia can't compete with that. Russia really isn't going to have much of a say. So to answer your question, no, I don't think Moscow's going to have a say or can block this. I think Trump's going to do what he's going to do.
Mark Toth, co-founder of Intrep 360, was our guest this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Machi. Greetings to your viewers again.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews here on TVP World.